What's going on? What's going on? This is your boy, Tone Duncan. Tuesday, 7 p.m. You're right here with me as we bring you IntellectualRadio.com's Truth Seeker. Every Tuesday, 7 p.m. It is your boy, Tone Duncan, your host right here, hanging out with you and bringing you the best that I can possibly bring every single week. I thank you so very much for coming in, hanging out with me. This week we'll be talking about a lot of different things as I try to bring the type of information that makes us truth seekers step up and stand together and conversate. Remember, this isn't about me, this is about us. So I'd like for you to like, comment, share, get into the conversation. We got a lot to talk about. I'm always excited to get this thing going. So how was your weekend? Hopefully it was well. For me, it was such a unique difference. I'm talking about I've had some crazy days. So I am excited to finally be outside of the sadness of losing family members, the rigors and stress of trying to help with some serious issues in life, and just to be able to come back, sit down and say, what's been going on in the world these last few days? We've got so very much to talk about, but what I want to kick off the conversation with, I want to talk about our children and our school systems. I want to talk about how I just had a conversation with a mom. She was excited. You know, we were talking on Facebook, started off just a normal chat. How you doing? How's everything? How are your children? How's your family? And it went from that to talking about schools and graduations, talking about what's going on with the children and our future. You know, our children are our hope. As we plan and prepare for them, we create opportunities for them to plan and prepare for their children. You know, and the conversation started off with this woman. She was extremely proud of her son for finally getting his act together and walking across that stage and getting that diploma. You know, and she was talking about how in her community, where the average kid doesn't graduate, where the average kid doesn't excel through academic paths, she was excited because her baby graduated. Now, they live out in Baltimore, and she was telling me about how some of the kids were really working hard and even had achieved awards for their hard work, their determination, for doing well in class. And, you know, I want to talk to you guys about this because, you know, when you walk away from this, you feel as though you've done what you needed to do and your child is on their way. You know, I'll never forget the day that I looked at my wife and I said to her, I said, honey, we've done all we can do to prepare our children for a positive future. We've put them in private schools and we are excited about the investment and that potential for our children. I want to tell you about the moment I realized that though it took all of my money, and I didn't have a problem, my wife didn't have a problem investing in the well-being, the long-term success of our children. But when we finally got to a situation where we could do better than we had done, we realized that what we thought we had done was insignificant and did not prepare our children. Let me step back for you because you might have just caught on to what I was saying. I spent all the money that we had. But when we juxtaposed, compared that education to the education outside of our community, not even the private schools prepared our children to be academically competitive, to do well and get into good colleges. See, I want you to know something. Chicago, Baltimore, none of these school systems are really that unique. See, what you have to understand is it's a small part of the ongoing education disaster that has hit Black children specifically, and colored and marginalized children in general the hardest. See, what you have to understand is that though my friend was in Baltimore, Baltimore is not an underfunded school system. You know, believe it or not, Baltimore spends the third most per pupil in the state. And I'm going to step it out one step further. They spend the third most in the country for education. But what we found out is going to hurt your feelings. And just for my Chicago people out here who want information relative to Chicago, we spend 15th in the nation in the amount of money per student. 15th. Think about that. Baltimore, third most. Chicago, 15th most. But here's what I'm trying to get you to understand is that these students receive diplomas. They receive diplomas under the belief that they had completed at a satisfactory level a 12th grade education. 12th grade, senior education, ready to move on to college. But what if I told you that the majority of our children that graduate from college, graduate from high school, don't really even have the achievement level of a 7th grade education? Now, I'm going to hurt your feelings with this. I'm going to tell you something you don't want to know. I'm going to tell you that African Americans have the lowest test scores nationally, and we're talking in STEM areas. See, we're not talking about just in areas where culturally it's biased. We're not talking about where one has to remember the difference between Hamlet and Shakespeare. We're talking about when one looks at core scores for algebra, geometry, science. This is where we're terrible at right now. This is where we're at the bottom of the barrel, and it's a problem. Because again, my friend was bragging with every bit of her heart, celebrating that she put her son through the rigors to prepare him for a future, not knowing, a lot of us not knowing that we do nothing but fall short oftentimes of a national 8th grade level of competency. But they're not telling us this. See, I'm going to tell you something that's really bad, is that these students and their families, see, they have no reason to suspect that they have anything less than a 12th grade education. But they have never been outside of their experience. See, as I said, when I was living in my little bubble, and I thought that I was paying for better education, it wasn't until I stepped outside of that bubble. It's not until my wife and I realized that other parents did the same thing. They did it in a different place. And our preparedness did not prepare our children. And do you know how many other children I saw in those same places? You know how many other mothers and fathers that I saw giving all of their money to these private institutions because they were better than a public institution, yet they were not adequate enough for the rest of the country. See, this is why we need to talk, because some of you have experienced the same thing. Man, Muhammad, I could go on all day about these kind of things, because the reality is that we think that somebody else is going to inherit the desire to help our children. So we drop them off at school like it's a glorified babysitter. We don't interact. We don't demand. We don't take part. We don't complain. We just accept whatever they give us, like we were the kid getting our classes, forgetting that we are no longer the kid, but responsible for the classes. Our children depend on us like they depend on us for food. You may not have had an opportunity to learn the stuff that you need to know to be able to prepare your children the way they need to, like me, like so many other hardworking people didn't have the information. But you, us, we can start this conversation and demand that our children are better represented by the state because they'll be better represented by their parents. Hey, you guys, I'm sorry I'm coming hard quick. I can't help it. This is something that I've got to talk about. I know a lot of you have a lot of thoughts in this area. This is your boy, Tone Duncan. Every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Like, comment, share. All three. We need them all. Get your friends involved. Let me hear something that's coming out of your minds, out of your mouths, as we embark on finding the facts and the truths to everything that we're doing here. See, the problem is that when these kids come out of school, it's completely impossible to think that they somehow are ready or prepared for the next level. So not only are they not going to get into a good school, but they're probably not even prepared to get into a decent school. Not probably, most likely not prepared, which means you get to a point, and most of you understand this. The better schools, you pay to go to their school because their name alone can create economic opportunities for you, can create networks where you build relationships with people who are aspiring and going places. You pay a little extra for that. You're privileged to be able to go. But what about those of us who had lower scores, who didn't get a reputable academic institution to stand behind us, but we still had to pay because our parents and everybody told us that college was the only answer? We go to a college where it's our money that is of the greater power. It's not the school. We get the graduation, we get that degree, and we get out here and can't even get a job. Because school is now just a business. And it's a business that hasn't properly prepared us to provide for our families. Sometimes not even to pay our own college debt. I know there's a lot of people out here who do not pay. And I love to hear these college institutions say this. Well, you know, so many of our students don't pay full boat. Well, no, they don't pay full boat. No, but just the percentage alone, plus all of the life necessities that they have, is enough to wipe it out as if they took every single dime they possibly could. Indentured servants coming out of academia and can't even find a job. Y'all know this is something that has to be talked about. Steph, what's going on? Muhammad, talk to me. Tammy, what's good? All the way from Texas in the house. You know, I tell you guys this, and I say this, and I hope you understand. 99% of my determination in life is based on a very, very wonderful person that I've had in my life for 23 years. And I tell so many of you, if you're having girl problems, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but my wife ain't one. Hit me. Ho. You guys, if you want to hear it, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a firm supporter of the relationships that are so desperately missing in our communities. It doesn't take one person, it takes an entire community to keep a marriage together. And I'm so thankful for the people who have put mine together, have stood there. I'm talking about my wife's mother, who was just paramount. You know, elders who knew us both and would sit us down and talk, and people who we could talk to. You guys, we don't get enough of that. And that's why we find ourselves in situations where it's time to raise children, when it's time to do the domestic things that are of importance. We have no connectivity because we forget how intra-connected we need to be to make it. That's the way the rest of society is. That's the way that other people make it. We need to start to focus in and make it in this way. Because after all, after you get this high school diploma and you can't even get a job, it tells you that there's a problem with our education system. Now, I've heard the NAACP talk about this, but when I hear the NAACP talk about this, they're usually attacking charter schools. Now, I'm not going to argue to the left or to the right about charter schools. That's not my relevance. My point is the schools that the states are paying for are inadequately preparing us. I want you to understand what I'm saying to you because a lot of you don't get it. What I'm talking about, there are schools in this city alone, in this city, that of all the African American students that had taken a test, I don't want to give the name of the school because it would almost be psychologically damaging. I can only tell you it's a high school in our Chicago community. It's a high school where our black men, young men, scored at the 9% proficiency level for math. I'm talking about a school where only one kid, one African American young male, had the minimum expectation for a grade to come out of there. And this is the problem that we're having in our communities. Few people even bother to ask, what the heck is going on? We just assume this rhetoric that we're being told, oh, all the tests are racist. Listen, many of you don't know this. I'm going to tell you this. We're scoring lower now than we did in 1990. And it was more racist then. So don't tell me that. What we need to talk about is how to change the problem, not just recognize it. See, because too many of us want to utilize these hollow problems, but we don't want to embark on the responsibility to change it. Listen, Leslie, if I don't talk about it, then it's not on my mind. If it's not on my mind, then chances are we can't all rap on it. And if we can't rap on it, we can't come together. We need this. I'm telling you, one of the problems that I've had is when I go into a school and I see kids who think that being intelligent is acting white. And I know that they don't mean to say that. See, what I'm saying to you is I know what they're saying is that when you are black, the words just are so unique and artistic. Why do you say I'm so bland and trying to be professional and smart? But the reality that we don't understand is that we have the right to utilize all forms of expression, and I need my children to have the greatest mastery of all the expressions. So when we talk to our children, we have to distinguish to them that there is a difference between talking intelligently, no matter what that sounds like. When one switches over their brain to be intelligent, we need to know that that's not the same conversation when you're hanging with your friends. Y'all feel me? I know you do. I know a lot of you deal with this because I know a lot of you are fearful that you may overeducate your child into not being accepted by everybody else. And this is something that we have to fix as parents. Because if you're scared that your child's not going to sound culturally credible, and that's the reason why you're scared to demand that your child takes more academic programs, then I have to go back to the pain that we're still feeling. Because too many of us are feeling like we are limited. See, so many of us, we profess to be fearful of a strong and powerful God, praising him constantly. But what do I notice? I notice something that blows my mind, and some of you know it too. If you truly believed in the power of God, why do you settle for such meager prayers? Why are you asking just to make it? This education system we have is a system that's designed to barely make it. Barely make it. sometimes we got to ask ourselves, who is creating this image of who we are? Who creates this idea that we are only this or we are only that? See, this thing happens on the inside. And this is the problem on why we're not taking care of our business when it relates to getting our kids the best academic opportunities they can. We have to go back and say, maybe this is an internal dialogue that I haven't quite fixed yet. Maybe because I never saw myself as academically inclined, I will not push my child. Because how can they be something their parents weren't? So many times we push our fears, our limitations onto our children. And the reason we do this is because we don't know any better. See, a person who's experienced poverty, they're going to treat eating differently than somebody who hasn't. See, I'll never forget that as a person who grew up without so many times, I had a different opinion about eating than my friends who had never experienced it. And they used to wonder, what's wrong with you? The food is here, but you're eating so fast. And you're acting like it's going somewhere. How many of you guys know that that's how we are in life? That's how we are in life. We're so scared something's going to go wrong. We're so scared to relive another hardship that we quickly settle for something that we have no business settling for. See, we don't miss the mark because we shoot too high. We hit the mark because we shoot too low. And this is where we have to get better. Hey, this your boy Tone Duncan. You're listening to the Truth Seekers every Tuesday, 7 p.m. I'm going to bring the business, and you guys are going to always keep it real. Listen, I started wondering, well, if this is happening with the undereducated in the inner city, what's the conversation outside of it? And as I started looking, I started checking out more and more guns are being purchased this year. Oh my goodness, you know, Black Friday might as well have been Gun Friday. So many pistols, so many firearms sold. And you guys thought that everybody was spending money on cryptocurrency. Huh, not in this country. So tell me more about these gun-toting Americans. Who are they? You know, they do research on everything. Let's see what the research has shown. See, so often you'll see some marketing of some American, right? Some white guy, he's got a gun, he's standing behind a flag, and he's got a Bible or something in his hand because the American marketed mantra is God and country. And this is the American popular culture, which led to that stereotype of gun owners being more patriotic and more Christian. But a new study has found that the subset of gun owners in this country with the strongest gun beliefs and policies in place are actually quite the opposite. See, what I'm going to tell you is that we found out that the average white gun-carrying American is both undereducated and under-religious. Now, did you know that? Because all my life, I was taught that these were the three values in America. The three values in America were patriotism, your country and its constitution, and your religion. But it comes to find out that what's really going on with these guns, as they've done deeper and deeper studies, is that it gives white Americans, and not just men, a false sense of power. Now, why? And when did this happen? So many people look at the fact that Obama was president and all of a sudden there was this upsurge of gun purchases. But what we didn't do is we didn't see what all of the research indicated. Because as you know, at the same time that Obama was becoming a president, America was also going through one of the greatest recessions in our history. And what research has actually shown is that white men were impacted in a way that most African American men weren't, and most minority men weren't. See, for the first time in a long time, the economic fortitude of white America was crippled. And for the first time, the one differing power was neutralized. For the first time, the average white American was scared. Scared because they no longer had economic defense. And so they changed the defense. And that defense became guns. It came at the same time they thought they might be losing their country too. So up comes the alt-right, up comes the scapegoat politics, and up comes your new president. And I have no problem with the sickness and the karma that comes from this country. But so many of us need to know the truth. See, when they did these studies, and these were amazing studies, I want you to understand that 33,000 people die every single year from guns. But nevertheless, it gives exploited people the perception of power. And that's the reason why it's always been allowed in capitalist countries, especially this one. Because if you're exploiting somebody, you gotta at least give them a bone. Make them feel like there's somebody while you're taking everything from everybody. This is what we notice. Because now we see who buys the guns. Why don't blacks feel that way? Why don't Latinos feel that way? Well, what research came up with is they were economically devastated before the recession. So there was no gain of power from having a gun. They were just as powerless economically, just as powerless in their communities. And this is something that I want you to know. Because in the communities where you feel powerless, there's escapism. How many of you understand escapism? My guy James Brown was the master of songs about escapism. See, when you can't find happiness in your world, you have to leave. Escapism is drugs, alcohol, sex, all kinds of things. Whatever you can, some people, art is escapism. Working out is escapism. There's positive, there's negative. But what we have to find out is that drug addiction has been an exploited escapism in this country for far too long. See, but one time, and I have to tell y'all this, one time, racism may have played a part in helping blacks and Latinos from being overwhelmed by the opioid crisis. Now think about this. I want you to think about this. Because the research done by Heller School of Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University showed that doctors, watch this, doctors were far less likely to prescribe opioids to blacks and Latinos. See, doctors prescribe narcotics more cautiously to non-whites. If the patient is black, the doctor is more concerned about the patient becoming addicted. At least this is what they tell you. See, my father, he was suffering from heart disease, and he had some real issues going on. And I'll never forget the day he called me from the hospital. He said, I couldn't get in my meds because the doctor thought I was on drugs, thought I was addicted to the pain meds. I said, well, Dad, why would they think something? Like, doesn't make any sense. He said, well, this is the way he treated me like a crackhead. I could see it in his face. I didn't understand it. I walked away confused. After the conversation, I asked a few doctor friends of mine, and they said, yeah, Yeah, that's the problem. They're really scared of addiction in the black community. Why just the blacks? I never understood that. All the research proves that whites use drugs at a higher frequency than blacks, even though blacks represent more incarcerated people for it. But we won't go there because we know better. Danielle, what's going on? What's going on? My soul sister, Lady Rochelle, what's good? Hope all is well. You guys check out Lady Rochelle. Lady Rochelle always has an awesome video on her page. Go check her out, y'all. Hey, y'all, check this out. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is that they have another reason why they're less likely to give minorities and blacks opioids. They're worried about them being sold on the streets. And further details into this study, because this was an actual study where they talked to doctors. Some of the doctors, when really, really pressed, why aren't you giving them the opioids like you give everybody else? One of the doctors actually said, I don't think I have the empathy for their pain like I do for somebody who looks like me. I understand they're hurt. I want to make sure that they're taken care of and healthy. But from a pain standpoint, for some reason, I feel they can take it a little more. This is actually part of the report. See, but the reality is that they were heavily influenced not to use these pain medicines, these opioids in the inner city, because they wanted to keep a clean feel on this devastatingly just sick perversion of health that we call the opioid destruction. See, over the last year, the recent opioid epidemic has garnered a lot of headlines. Since 2015, the drug overdoses in this country have been the leading cause of death of all accidental deaths. What I want to talk to you about is if you took guns, car crashes, even HIV, all together doesn't come close to the amount of people who have died in 1 year, 2015, 52,000. Okay, here, let me give you a little more perspective of that. See, because every time you hear about deaths, overdoses, and drugs, it immediately points you in the black community. But I'm talking about 82% white. See, and it's not because one is better, one is worse. It's because drugs are a sickness. See, in 2016, preliminary data had suggested that 59,000, somewhere closer to 65,000 people died last year from overdose. That is the highest drug overdose number in the history of this country. Now, mind you, we're not talking about increased incarceration. We're not talking about mass white incarceration right now. See, that's where my problem is. My problem isn't that they're not going to jail, it's that they had a chance to see jail didn't work at our expense. See, in the next 10 years, as many as 650,000 people will die because of the opioids. You know how many? Okay, let's go back to Baltimore. That's the entire size of Baltimore. Okay? Right now, with the amount of people that are dying, we realize the sickness that is. See, in October, the president declared that opioid epidemics was a public health emergency. How many of you guys heard me? I said a public health emergency. When they dropped heroin into our communities, when they dropped crack cocaine into our communities, that wasn't a public health emergency. See, what that was crime. And we listened, and we were offended at these criminals. How dare they sell drugs in our neighborhood? How dare you're a crackhead? You need to be in jail. Go feed your child. See, because we bought it. We believed what they told us because we thought that the people we saw on the screen were the real criminals, but the criminals were the ones that criminalized addiction. See, here's what I'm saying to you. This epidemic has been in the making since 1999. See, you have to understand what I'm telling you here. What I'm telling you is that a particular family, one family, created the entire opioid epidemic in this country. Okay? And what I want to tell you so you understand is that just from 1999 to 2010, sales of these opioids went up 400%, and they have skyrocketed since then. But we don't know about it. Most of us never hear about it. And the reason most of us never hear about it is because we've been redlined from opioids. And our white American fellow citizens have been mass exploited. Mass exploited. See, the race of those affected really explains the difference in the response. See, this is not the first time the United States had to face the opioid epidemic. Again, remember this, coming out of Vietnam, coming out of that war, 1970s, blacks and Latino communities faced massive, unprecedented amounts of heroin, drug overdoses every night. And then similarly, the crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s and the 90s. But the response from the public about these epidemics, about these travesties, it wasn't about help. It was about crime. It was about minimum sentencing, maximum punishment. It was about make them pay. And we bought into it, you guys. So many of us. The amount of deaths in our communities, the amount of gun violence. Do you realize gun violence has never been as high across the country as it was when the inner cities were fighting against drug addiction? When all the crack babies were going straight to the abortion clinics? Do you hear me? This was one of the most horrific times in our history. And we were criminalized because we were already marginalized. And now today, we're seeing the difference. We're seeing what happens when the government loves you, when they see you. And like that doctor that was pushed and prodded until he finally admitted, I have a greater empathy when the person looks like me. See, this is truth. This is American truth. So many of us have such ingrained racism that even blacks suffer on a regular basis from being racist to each other. And it's sad. So sad. And yes, we are dying. We are dying at unprecedented rates. See, this issue that I'm talking about right now ran across the New York Times headlines. New violence seen in the users of cocaine. See, that's how America learned about the crack epidemic. See, the media reflected stories of crack babies, warning that crack use by single black mothers in particular will lead to a new wave of criminals called super predators. And you heard Hillary use that word how many times? Super predators, huh? That's what you call the disenfranchised, the marginalized, the forgotten, the criminalized, the abandoned. They're not called American citizens. Survivors of the most horrific environment, catastrophic culture but yet they're super criminals. That's what they are. Super criminals. And worse than being a super criminal, they were super predators. Meaning not only did they commit crime, but they would put the message into America's mind that like a predator, they would go out lurking, seeking, and finding, just to scare you into seeing that this wasn't a person, but an animal. It's what you call a predator. So when they talked about those mothers who were crack addicts, there wasn't this kind of, how can we help them that you're hearing today? It was, how do we get them off our streets? See, we had a vicious attack on the impoverished communities, ridiculous prison sentences. As a result, the U.S. never got the treatment systems in place that they needed to deal with these issues. I'm going to talk about karma to you right now. This karma right here. See, because when you don't take care of a problem, you don't learn strategies to create more effective solutions. Because you didn't care when the blacks and minorities were being pilferaged with drugs. You didn't prepare yourself for the inevitable consequence of it coming full circle. See, I'll never forget reading a book, Up from Slavery. Booker T. Washington said to the great white contingency that was, good white Americans would never allow racial injustice because, like all evils, it has a sickness that cannot be quelled. See, it starts off on the minority, it starts off on the exploited, but then it turns its evilness towards whatever it can bite. And it turns back. And now we see the exploitation on regular white Americans to the extent of horrific injustices. See, this is the thing I need to tell you. But the death toll has been climbing every year. You got that, right? And the U.S. has responded to this crisis by investing in drug addiction treatments that would really help. But there's not enough time. There's not enough infrastructure. There's not enough to help. The carnage is happening everywhere. Every day, people are coming in, just like the 90s when we were coming home. How many of you guys remember? I lived in the projects. I come home, walk up the project steps. I see somebody, I didn't know if they was OD, if they was dead. Now they're seeing this in their own communities. Now we as Americans are having to relearn what us from the inner cities have sadly known too long. See, I can be as long-winded on this one, but I'm not. All I'm telling you is that America is seeming to reap the evils of how it treated its exploited. And that's not good for any of us. So I'm hopeful that America heals itself so that the next time we are forced to be exploited, we have some form of refuge for our own. Hey, this your boy Tone Duncan, Truth Seeking, every Tuesday, 7 p.m. I've got about 15 minutes left with you, and I want to sway this conversation over to something that is a little tough to talk about. So many of us have been following the international news and have heard about this crisis in Libya. How many of you have heard about the sickness in Libya being slavery? The forced labor of people who had come to that country in hopes of a dream. Now, this is something that a lot of you probably didn't know. A lot of you probably didn't know that Facebook and other social media is to blame for a lot of the propagandizing that happened. How many of you understand that social media has allowed various pirate groups, criminal groups in Libya to put up Facebook business pages that basically said, change your life. Come to Tripoli and we will give you jobs. We will provide you access to Europe. We will do all of these things. And they're coming only to be enslaved. Apparently, the minute you come into Libya, you're immediately arrested if they see you and sent to some kind of immigrant camp. But the problem is that so many of these immigrant camps aren't really owned by the government. So many of these are actually criminal camps where they take you straight from the camp into slavery. But that's not the worst. So you have to understand there's something called the organs market. They're harvesting our organs and they're selling them on the black market. And they're utilizing sub-Saharan Africans and Nigerians, and they're taking all of our people. They're ripping them open and they're selling their parts. And this is the real sickness, because these people can never escape execution for organs. And we need to know this because it's deeper than slavery. See, a slave only gets you 700 Libyan, but organs, they'll get you real US money. And if you don't know that this sickness has been going on for a long time, then you don't know much. I heard a lot of people talk about how Obama was predominantly responsible for the Libyan government being destroyed and all of this lunacy and sickness being able to prevail. What people don't understand, it was France and Italy that both, without any American anything, wanted to go in there and destroy that place because it had become the access point for so many migrant Africans to get into Europe, and they were tired of Africans going into their country. So they actually were paying militant groups to mistreat the Africans trying to make it to their countries in hopes of a better chance. So I want you to know it's so deep, y'all. It's so deep, because this is why we in this country have to do better, because we are the only hope for the rest of the minority and underprivileged, colonized, disenfranchised that look up to us. They look up to us, but we need to do our part. This is why we fight. This is why we stand in solidarity. This is why we educate our children to international news, because too many times you live in a small bubble. I'm going to tell you right now, we need to see our world and not just our city. We need to take responsibility, ownership for all those who depend deeply on our success. See, we have leaders all around us. It's a special day, because if the blacks in America were their own country, we'd be the richest black country in the world. And we need to understand the responsibility that comes with that amazing blessing. So many of our family members paid a terrible price to position us where we are right now. We must take advantage of it. We talk about the problems, but we can't use them for solutions. See, a solution is what you do once the problem has been observed. See, what we need to do is stop cutting through with excuses. Stop allowing people to come in and tell you it's not your fault. Because what that does is it makes you feel somebody else's job is going to be to make things right. We are not ever going to be righted by a wrong. We must fix a wrong by righting it through uniting ourselves. See, too many times we think that it's okay to underperform, to undertry. It's only you. But it's not. We're interconnected. We need each other. We depend on each other's efficiency, and that's called capitalism. What we need to understand is our power and our influence is equal to our responsibilities. for our people in this country, and to a greater extent, how we impact them in this world. So many of us want to feel victims, but we don't realize victors have just as many problems. See, you'll never have a problem-free life. The question is, what do you want to sacrifice for? So many times I see people go into a store and they're not satisfied with what somebody else said they was going to do for them. I'm about to get churchy on y'all, but you're not ever asking yourself why you don't demand from yourself the same satisfaction. Too many times I listen to people, they will say, I don't go to that store because they don't treat me the way I should be treated. And the first thing come out of my mind, not my mouth, I don't want to hurt nobody's feelings, is, do you hold yourself to that same level of accountability? Do you demand that same level of service and accountability when it comes to you fulfilling the promises you make to yourself? Too many times I'm listening to how somebody says somebody else let them down, but we are letting ourselves down daily. And we need to be accountable. We need to step up, realize that this is something that can be only fixed when we fix ourselves. So we get into these thoughts where we forget. See, we forget that no matter what caused you to fall, it is your feet that must make you stand. Together, we can do this. But we have to understand that there are no excuses. We can't afford excuses. I know you've been victimized. I know you've been exploited. I know you've been mistreated. But you have to step up. If you don't step up, then it's your fault. Because in a world where survival is the only alternative, except for failure, you've got to accept survival as your strategy. Hey, too many times these conversations turn into disliking somebody and being mad, but I'm going to tell you right now, as I've studied and I've studied, it is through the collective unity of those who care, of those who want to see people happy, that you can ever have privilege or ever have a chance. Too many times we are taught to divide ourselves, minimize our effort, peter out into some foolish act of emotional hostility, and get nothing done. We need to be truthful to ourselves. When you have a problem that is bigger than your group must think bigger than it has. I can go on all day on this stuff, but you guys get it. You know exactly what I'm saying. A lot of people, they don't want to hold themselves accountable. They don't want to say, I let myself down and I've let my community down. Because too many of us have been taught to think individual. It's not about it. No, only God can judge me. You know, it's a wonderful conversation if you as a group ain't going nowhere. But if I need you and you need me, then I'm going to judge your effects, your abilities, and your commitment. And I expect and anticipate you doing the same. See, we need to move away from relationships with people where accountability is not part of the conversation. We need to remove our allegiance from those who don't have the same goals as you. You are wasting time and you are squandering effort when you deal in a world that does not compel you to be your best. Too many times we have lived as if we are still on a plantation, don't want to do nothing because everything seems like it's for the glory of somebody else. But I'm going to tell you right now, we collectively have to regroup and rebrand this mantra. We need to talk to each other on a regular basis. And I know that so many of you listening to me right now do. But talking is only part. The other part is walking. We need to be more accountable in our communities. So many of us want to be effective. We want to be a part of the solution, but we're not engaging in the day-to-day plight. So I'm asking you guys right now, we got the holiday services going on, all the holidays, all these holidays, who's going to do something, step out there for the new year and say, I'm going to be a part of the solution? For the whole year, I've sat around saying that I had a problem, but I never actually compelled myself to be a part of the solution. So I'm hopeful that a lot of you take this on this year, because guess what? In just a few more days, it's 2018. I'll be here. I'm going to be part of it. You'll see me out there. Hey, Operation Smoothie, we was out on Friday night over on 63rd and King Drive. We did over 83 kids, over 150 smoothies. And remember, it's all about interacting with our children. Until next week, this your boy, Tone Duncan. IntellectualRadio.com. We are an iHeart station, and this is Truth Seekers. Good night, y'all. Peace.